We are a little late because of technical problems. Actually, I have to welcome Jacques Herzog, welcome you. I had a deal with Jacques that he would come to Berlage here when Ajax would be playing. So we counted that Ajax would be playing tomorrow in the European Championship, and they lost for the first time since many years. So I was sure he would come. So I'm really pleased that you came. Anyway, when we introduce Jacques Herzog, I talk about Jacques Herzog and Pierre de Meuron. Obviously, you know they are born in 1950 in Basel. But what I think is incredible, important, is that when I know them a little bit, and when you know their work, you know that they are located, their office is located in Basel, close to Switzerland, or in Switzerland. Actually, Basel is Switzerland. Actually, at the border of France and Germany, I would say their work, in a way, fits kind of attitude which belongs to this mixture of the attitude of these three cultures. I think that's very important. Jacques is lecturing tonight under the title Processing. I have to say he's the first who really is lecturing this year according to the title, the year title, the theme, Process. When I would mention, three of their earlier works, the Shop and Apartments, Basel, Schützen Marstraße, they did in 93 the Guts Gallery, 92 the Ricola Factory in Laufen, 88. I only mention three projects which I think are examples of their critical approach in which the skin is playing an important role. When Jacques, in an interview, he said, for me, fashion, music, and architecture are in fact three disciplines which are not superficial. They are disciplines which express our time. They shape our sensibilities. I think, in that sense, their work, in my opinion, is very close to those disciplines. And of course, the relationship between his work and art is strong. I would say they are not only talking about it, but I think their work is embedded with it. I would like to mention a quote by Ram, who will be here in a few minutes, who said, I'm writing, when he was writing, he said, I'm waiting for the hidden temper, for the moment things will spin off of control. When he talked about their work, I think it's quite interesting, these few words. When Jacques and Pierre are using galleons in the winery in Napa Valley, which has recently been finalized, I would say it's showing another example of a degree of transparency which with materials which actually are not meant to be used within architecture. We all know. I will close my introduction, and it's needless to say that Herzog de Meuron are working currently on the Tate Gallery for the Bankside in London, and they were finalists for the MoMA competition in New York, which Taniguchi is building. Jacques, the stage is yours.
I think it's two. Good evening. It's a pleasure to talk in front of so many people. As always, when we have to give a lecture, the question is, what should we talk about, actually? Because after years and years of working, we've done so many projects, as all the other architects, and the question is always which ones you pick and what context do they fit in, and what's the reason? Why should I give another lecture? Why should I talk about this rather than about that? This is in fact a real serious problem, and I hope I picked the right projects for you tonight. In any case, whatever happens, I think it would be very interesting if we could talk after the lecture, if I can stimulate you in some way or another to ask questions, to have a feedback to our work. Because this is very important for us, this kind of feedback. Because as Will said, we are from Basel, which is a Swiss city, but it's on the border of 3 countries, and in fact it's a trinational place, trinational city. I will talk also about the city later, for which we did a study. Being from a small country like you are, Holland, and in many ways Switzerland is comparable to Holland. It's also, in fact, a kind of an urban landscape, but unfortunately we have high mountains, so the communication is not as good as it is in Holland. But it's, in another way, I think, very similar, that being from a small country, you need to express yourself in a different language than yours. You get used to that very early, or you never get used to that. And doing architecture has a lot to do with this, has a lot to do with communication, with what you want to say in architecture. What does it mean? Does it mean something? And where do you put it? Unlike a big nation such as France or Germany or America, cultural nations which have their own identity, Switzerland doesn't have that. It has local traditions, but it doesn't have a national pride. It has nothing that one could say, this is Switzerland, and we are Swiss, working in a Swiss tradition. Like French architects can do that, or German architects can do that, German writers, German philosophy, German painting, whatever. This is certainly interesting, but it's also a problem, I think, for young architects, especially today in a global world. It's also quite interesting to see what comes from smaller countries and how people from smaller countries behave in this world. We have an office in Basel, but we also have an office in London for the Tate. Especially we had to establish an office for the Tate. We also have one in Munich very soon, but only temporary offices, which help us to deal better with this or that big projects. Altogether, we are currently 70 people, so the office is quite large, which is certainly not something we have a great ambition to do also in the future, or to continue growing, but we just adapt this size to the kind of projects we are working on, and it's just something which is also an experience like another one, like the small scale things we could do earlier. Tonight I present 9 projects which are connected to each other through a kind of just one element may flip into the next project, whatever it is, a kind of type of glazing, or a shape, or a color, or maybe the fact that it's about art, or that an artist has worked on, or that its shape is not so easily definable, or things like that. And maybe we can talk about that later, and start now with the first slide. Could we turn off the light, please. Where's the pointer?
Back probably.
Here.
Yes.
No.
No.
Voilà. I'm sorry. The first building is the Goethe Gallery in Munich, which is obviously almost like a box. Next one. But it's not quite just a box. It's changing with the light, with the seasons, and it's revealing other things than just being one rectangular shape. It starts revealing or raising questions such as, is it one cube standing on the floor, or is it something which is between two layers of light, or is it an object which is solid, which has a glass band, and another object which is in fact the truth, something which is sunken in the ground with another light band on top. Next one. The more the light shines through from the inside in the evening, the more the second version, these two bands, these two layers of light on which the solid part is floating, becomes the one reading you would put in the foreground. Next one. Next one. And the fact that the frosted glass, the aluminum, and the birch plywood, this is birch plywood, is very similar. Those three materials have very similar surface. So with some light, with pale light, they almost blurring their borders like one thing. And even, revealing some connection to the birch trees which stand in the garden. Those we have planted anew. Next one. Or then at night, it's like a big lantern almost in the garden. Next one. We also like to use this same material, the glass, with a light, slightly mirroring effect in order to sort of continue the garden, the landscape in the building, like a kind of a frozen pond or a frozen part of the garden. Next one. In section, it's very simple, almost primitive. It shows, this is the line of the garden, pedestrian level, that we have two identical spaces through which we have these two tunnels which cut through. This provokes the lecture that we have something solid on which stands on these two bars. At the same time, we create two identical spaces so that once you stand in the basement, you don't have the feeling to be in an inferior space, in a less important space. So walking through the building, you have a very homogeneous impression, which we absolutely wanted to create here in a small gallery. In a large gallery, in a large building, that would be terrible, because it would enhance the claustrophobia that we would like to avoid. But in a small gallery, this certainly is an advantage. Next one. You see these two pieces, these two kind of tunnels which cut through what I called the box. One of these tunnels works as an entrance area, kind of a library, from which stairs go up into the upper gallery or down into the lower gallery. Next one. That stair which goes up which also reveals some more complex interior space than one would expect from the outside. It also, this stairwell is working as a gallery where very often the curator, the client, Ingvild Götz, starts their exhibitions. In fact, she uses this private gallery as a kind of a Kunsthalle, a kind of a private Kunsthalle. Next one. For instance, for a show with Cindy Sherman, that's where the stair comes up, and that's one of the first. That's the first upper space. The light bands we saw from outside as part of this overall box can be seen inside as a light band which gives daylight from the top in a very homogeneous way. The advantage of this system is that we have walls and ceiling in the same material, which enhance the fact of a very simple, very calm exhibition space, which in this case we wanted to have. Next one. Again, Cindy Sherman with later works. Again, the light bands and the way we cut artificial light bands into the ceiling covered with frosted glass, which is sitting flush into the ceiling. This gallery type was at the basis of what we did for the Tate Gallery later. Next one. The Tate Gallery, as I said, is based on several issues. The galleries, one gallery type is comparable to the Götz Gallery, as we may see later. Another thing you can see here, the Thames, the River Thames, St. Paul's Cathedral and the power station before we touched it. You can see clearly the idea of the architect who was looking for this direct relationship, urban relationship to St. Paul's, which is, for all Londoners, or most of the Londoners, they always talk about St. Paul's Cathedral. And obviously this was an important urban ambition of Sir Giles Scott. Next one. You can see the same thing from here, from the St. Paul's side, and the stair which goes down, where the pedestrian bridge of Norman Foster will link the two shores. You can see the building, which is almost like a mountain of bricks sitting there. You really don't never know, is it a nice building or an ugly building? Is it a frightening building at least? It has this, this urban connection, but in fact you couldn't approach the building because everything has been done to keep people away from the building because it was a power station. So it's a very paradox situation of attraction and the necessity to push people away. Next one. So we enhance this urban idea of this connection with the tower, this vertical tower. But instead of taking it down or touching it in any way, we just added another tower which is lying on the roof, which is balancing the whole thing in a horizontal way. It's like a cross. At the same time, this kind of a cross is what we did inside the building. You can cross the building from the north to the south, from the east to the west, without going actually to the museum. You just walk through it like as you walk through a piece of landscape. Next one. All these images, these 3D images, are done by some professional firms, and we don't have anything to do with that. They are just kind of political images which help to raise money. So they just, in some way, are cartoons or caricatures of what we try to do. But you can see Norman's Bridge, and you can see all the glazing, the light box, the light beam we put on top, and so on and so on. So this not so fast, sorry. The urban idea is just being reinforced. We just push even harder to make what is there even more real, or to enhance some of the evident aspects of what is there. Next one. Another thing is we take buildings away which were lying or were sitting around this big building in order to keep people away. And starting to take these low-rise pieces away, you start to understand also, again, this connection towards the city. Where is the city, in fact? You start to understand. And you can see, once you touch this big thing, you know, that it's really like digging out a mountain. And this was very important discovery, because we worked a long time on it and tried to, you know, change windows and, you know, touch the surface of it. And whatever we did, it was ridiculous. It was too strong. It was too heavy, too massive. So we tried to find other strategies to deal with this mass. Next one. We enhanced it. We dig it out. We make a big ramp which enters the building from underneath at its lowest level, which was not existing there. We can see that later. So you walk underneath, thus making this big mass even more impressive. Next one. We saw the turbine hall and thought, this is an impressive space, but let's make it even bigger. And we take out this whole floor, so that we literally dig it out and go down into almost the stomach of the building. That's where the ramp goes down. Yeah, next one. That's the layer we took out. And that's the entrance from the west side where the ramp will go down. And the sun in the evening comes from that side and will create quite an impressive light and way which in some way casts shadows on this ramp. So we use this element to, as I said, to enhance this impressive mass. Next one. And this whole space, the turbine hall, the former turbine hall, will remain empty as a kind of like a big station where people can walk through or take a cafe or meet people. Or it also has art in there. It could be big art, large scale, but it could, and that would even be more attractive, I think, very small scale art. On that side, we will have, which is the former boiler house, the galleries will be fully packed building part. The void, the empty, and the full. Next one. That's again one of these 3D images where you see the ramp and the people go down and this kind of a platform which links the north and the south part of the site. Next one. That's a view from the ramp. Again, the bridge. And all these people, you know, that just walk through the building without necessarily going to the museum, which museum entrance will be there. In the later stage, we will also have galleries on this side, so that going down the ramp, you have a whole world that you enter, a city where you can go to different types of spaces, different types kind of art, different type of meeting points, etc. Next one. In a very interesting way, this central axis, this big central space, the turbine hall, could be compared to the Devine Gallery, which is this space, which is in the Tate Gallery at Millbank, which I think is the nicest gallery they have now. And it's a very big and in some way a rough space where contemporary art is quite attractive. Maybe this is only a psychological aspect, but psychological aspects are, I guess, very, very interesting if you see how clients judge your work or the progress in your work. Next one. This is a section where the switch house is missing, this third layer. This is the turbine hall, which is in the middle, which is empty, and the boiler house, which is packed with galleries on 3 levels, 1, 3, 4, 5. This is the top gallery, which all belong together. And this is level 2, where we have restaurant and cafe and auditoriums and different other spaces. Next one. This model shows in which way we deal with the new wall, which is between the turbine hall and the boiler house. In which way we deal with these massive steel columns, which you mostly see in a perspective way. So when you look from the side, you almost only see these huge columns. And instead of fully glazing the whole wall, we make it kind of a dark wall through which we have, into which we cut big windows which stand out, which sort of almost bite through the structure. And those are all glazed big pieces which in some way are from the same family or the same language as the light beam on top. And these are all glass without any framing, all glass pieces, next one, which are also working like big screens. So once you come into the museum, you can look at this big wall and understand where you would like to go and where you can see which kind of a show. Next one. When you go down the ramp and you can see these different big windows which show where people are and show the light and show where the art is. They are like big monitors, like what we have on top. So the strategy is to leave these steel and brick pieces and dig them out and add these glass pieces which cut through in such a way they are even neglecting the existing, because they just literally bite through the steel mass. Next one. The galleries and the concourses and so on and so on. Next one. And one of the galleries which shows the type of ceiling we are thinking of. Next one. It's a gallery type that we have built for a friend, an artist, Herzog, and where we developed and tested this type of skylight, where glass panels are cutting into, are being put into the ceiling, flush with the ceiling. And again, we have the same quality of the wall also as a ceiling. We don't have all glazed ceilings like in the 19th century and sometimes in the 20th century, like where you seem to be blown through the space, and all these very expressive, sometimes very expressive skylights, which we also didn't find appropriate for this building. Next one. We tested, as everything, we did big full-scale mock-ups where we tested these openings, and of course for the Tate they are much more sophisticated as the one we did for Herzog, because it needs to require to fit different requirements for dark space or to deal with the sun and so on. And those pieces seem to come out quite well. They also provide very good light, very homogeneous light, and they look very, very simple, very basic, very strong still. And we were very happy to be able to do this studio for Herzog so that we can test this and see it in reality. And we think it's a very interesting solution for Bankside, which goes well with the character of the building. Next one. You can see those galleries here which have those types of skylights, not only for daylit areas but also for artificial light. So when you stand in the building, you do not really know is it daylight or artificial light. The light seems thus to filter through the whole building. We also rejected the idea of having different floor types. We always have the same maximum height. So you can have low or high floors, spaces in every floor. You don't have those typical hierarchical museums where on one level you have drawings or photographs, the small scale thing, and then you have the larger, and the higher up you come, the more you are really almost close to God. So we rejected this idea and work on something which is as intense and as powerful on every floor. We even cut into the floors and create very, very high spaces, all at a sudden, or 15-meter high spaces, which are breaking the rhythm. Next one. Like here, for instance, which is the full height of the existing cathedral windows of the building. So we expose the existing as like a piece. Next one. That will be this window. So when you come in down the ramp, you can see from the outside this huge space, actually, as a light shining through the window. Next one. The light beam is not just a light box sitting on top, but it has very different type of light in it and different type of spaces. It's like a house sitting and also cutting into the building. This shows in section a similar type, gallery type, as we have for the Guts gallery, where the daylight comes into from the side. So at night, light shines through this glazing and provides a different type of light, let's say, than the restaurant which sits on top or other spaces. Next one. So that type of glazing will be part of the light box sitting on top of the Tate. Next one. Next one. That's a model for the light box, which also will work as a screen, as a big screen. Next one. The next project is, as I said, the studio for the artist, which helped us, which served as a kind of a big mock-up. This artist studio, the studio of Herzog. He's an artist who we've done several things together. We'll see two other things we've done together. He's a kind of a conceptual artist who wrote very interesting pieces on perception, and we surely have learned a lot from him and done a lot of work with him. This very simple building is in Mulhouse, near Basel, in the agglomeration of the city, on the French side. And the building has these two canopies, one towards this wall, which created an interesting space here, and one sort of opening to the garden. The water is being collected on the roof, as we do for many buildings in the recent past, and still do work on that, so that the building is like a natural object, like a stone in the landscape, and which then will change over the years. In this case, the rainwater falls down and created these colored surfaces, which was very strange, and we didn't know where it comes from until we understood that it comes from the factories in the neighborhood, which have such a pollution that the color was bound by rain and fell down. It's not toxic, but it's still quite... And it's amazing this happened with an artist studio. And it's a tremendous concurrence to Remy's work. Almost like a kind of a Ken Noland. Next one. When it's dry, it's also quite nice with the trees, so we decided to leave it. Next one. The space with the wall. Remy is an artist who is not just painting, he has like different zones in his studio. He works with silkscreen techniques and with a lot of other buildings where he writes, where he has assistants work on different projects. So it's like a little village almost. Next one. So you can see some of the buildings in the neighborhood. Many people from Basel move in the French neighborhood, because the prices are much lower, and you can get whole areas like this, which, used to belong to, like this guy who owned the factory, and the fact that he has such a terrible pollution proves that the business doesn't go so well anymore. So you can buy big pieces for decent prices. Next one. And Remy worked on a kind of a park himself. So he moved entire big trees, almost a forest. And he worked on the flatness of the garden. He is obsessed with flatness, and he literally did it by hand with assistance. So the whole park, don't have a slide of that, is like the flattest part of the world almost. And different materials are almost merging with each other. These are different other buildings he has in the studio. Next one. The plan of the studio, storage and 2 studios. You can see the way the daylight, the skylights are cut in the ceiling. Next one. Next one. The space between this wall and one of the studios. Next one. Which he sometimes also uses almost like a kind of a museum. He works with text and colors, and that's also one of the reasons why we have often worked with texts in our architecture. In a way where text is related to perception, not as an information, not as a kind of a pop tradition, but more in the tradition of being like part of the surface, like part of what you see. Next one. In section, you can see the simplicity of these light boxes. And what I said about the flatness is nothing but the extension of the interior space into the neighborhood, done in a very radical way. Next one. Other paintings which deal with text, and another image which demonstrates in which way this lighting system works. Next one. Next one. Next one. Another project is the show we had at the Pompidou Center. I think it was in 94 or 95. And there we asked Rémi Zab, he's the artist, whether he could do the installation for our show, because I don't think an architect knows how to do a show. How should he or she? And we developed this thing together with Rémi, and that was a very, very interesting experience. Next one. Jacques was commissioned to do the show in Paris in the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris a year ago for Giacometti, who was certainly one of the most interesting shows in the last 10 years. And he dealt with those different scales of the bronze and the paintings in a very new way. And so we hoped he could develop something very specific and very interesting for an architect. And he developed this scheme of the ceiling and this second level of the tables on which everything is spread out, like a city, like the pattern of a city. And the tables on which the models were standing are a bit lowered, so that it enhances again the flatness almost of this arrangement. The walls were empty. They were just left over for 3 pieces of artists with whom we have been working with, and works which are relating to our work or to this exhibition. Next one. You can see in which way these models work, and tables and chairs. You could get there. Here they are all stored. And normally it has chairs between, like in a library, so that you perceive the work of the artist, of the architect, from a perspective of a table and not from perspective like a piece of art which hangs on the wall, which is, I think, a very important distinction, also a help to avoid this very often ridiculous attitude to frame pieces or to treat plans like art. Art lies not there, it lies more in the conceptual quality of, as everybody knows. Next one. The engine depot, the signal box, another signal box on which we work now, and the distance between, which is the distance between the time we work on that, but also the distance in the city. Next one. Videos, urban studies. Next one. Photographs by Thomas Ruf, who's another artist we have a lot of appreciation and we work with. Next one. And Rémi Zaug, Mais moi, la ville, je te vois. You can hardly see the painting. Next one. Next project, which is the urban study I was talking about, the city of Basel with the Rhine River. The city spreads in 3 countries, the Swiss part, France, and Germany. And in fact, people live here and work in different parts, but they are not really aware that this is like one city. It has Weil am Rhein, which you may know from the Vitra Museum. It's the same city. And the Weil Museum, which has been recently opened, which is a bit further out, this is one city. And in the future, it's only interesting to understand these connections and to go beyond psychological barriers, which are very heavy and very clear. And the more we worked on this urban study, the more it was interesting to understand the psychological background of that. And we did the study more as a kind of a thing to understand how a city works, rather than propose things, how we should do this or that project. It was more like proposals to define areas where the city should go rather than others. So obviously the Rhine River, and you can see the more dense area here, is the key element of the city. Next one. And that's where the river bends from the north, from the south, or from the mountains, where it goes up north to Holland, to Rotterdam actually. And the Rhine River, this bend, was also the reason why the city was originally built there 2,000 years ago. Because why should someone go there rather than there? It's always something which appeals, which is appealing to people. Of course, there's protection, or there's maybe water or whatever, but there's almost always, that's at least what we believe, something which has attracted people, which has to do with also a physical quality, or something which was attractive. Like a piece of art can be attractive, or a human being can be attractive. And the bend was certainly more attractive than just go somewhere, anywhere. And you can see that from these buildings, the classical silhouette of a city. And so it's so obvious to sort of go on with this, to make this the most typical element of a city. Next one. But what happened, in fact, is that as soon as the city evolves towards the north, France and Germany, and even the Swiss part, because that belongs to another Swiss canton already, the neighbors didn't touch the river anymore, because they were almost scared, like as if the river belonged to the old part of the city. And in fact, this is true that most of the communities in the neighborhood are developing their schemes rather here than along the river. So one important element in the future will be to enhance the river as a natural given, and also as something where the city takes part, where the German, the French, and the Swiss parts show their faces. Next one. For instance, like this. It's just very schematic. That was not so interesting for us show the forms that this could take. Next one. A second scheme we were proposing, a second element which was so evident, is the railway tracks. That's what makes the city also special. It has the German railway system, which you may all know because everybody has once gone from the north to the south, and everybody goes through here. And the French railway track system come together in the Swiss station and then move towards Switzerland or Italy. And to turn these fields or the areas along these track fields into strong elements, strong urban elements, like strong vectors, so that the Rhine and these artificial river system would create strong pieces within the overall city scheme. Next one. Such as this, or next one. What we try to express actually at the end of this study, I mean it's a very, very long study and I just show very few slides. We also worked on the side valleys, is that at the end the city expresses itself according to specific topographic and artificial elements which have over the years or decades or centuries become strong rather than on others. And one extreme example is, of course, Venice, which fills out every square meter. Of course, this is an island. That's why it's so clearly visible. But it's interesting as a model, which fills out every square meter and which, in fact, cannot be changed anymore. You know, it's in fact a dead city, and you also get this feeling of a dead city. It's beautiful, but it's dead. It cannot move anymore. But at the end, the city has grown into this shape, you know, and this shape again has an effect back on the people and also on the visitor, like a psyche, like a psychological pattern. You can understand everything. The city cannot move anymore, not even a square meter. Next one. Paris is a bit like this in the center, but for a different reason, because it's almost a crystalline pattern which cannot be changed anymore. New York is similar to Venice, and there also you have sometimes this feeling of death, even if it has, of course, areas which can be changed, which can change a little bit the character. You can make it a bit nicer, but you cannot change it radically without a tabula rasa. Next one. These two urban types are contrary to that urban type, which is an antique city, which obviously is an artificial print, just an invention being put on top of the planet. Which pattern has been, I mean, this pattern has been invented and been found practical and interesting once, and and to be repeated as a standard over decades and even centuries. Or, next one, this survives in the 20th century, like Brasilia, in the modernism, where again, in the nowhere's lands, someone comes and puts a scheme which obviously is not a random scheme, or which is not following some traces of existing whatever, but designing a new image on top of something. Next one. Oops. Let's go back to New York. This is Fifth Avenue, and that's 54th Street, and this is our proposal for the MoMA expansion. I don't really present the scheme. I also didn't really present the Tate, just to make that point clear. I just wanted to enhance a few points. I never spoke about interior spaces, really. And there, I just say a few things about the overall layout and about the tower we were proposing. In fact, you can see from this side that this tower, which we call the curatorial tower, is a kind of a tower which starts on 53rd Street and moves over onto the new side on 54th Street, like a sculpture which moves over and looks down, overlooks these new pieces, and shows itself from Fifth Avenue as a new sign for the museum. Next one. But we were not so interested in the sign for the museum, rather in that piece as something, as a possibility to be in this street, 53rd Street, which is a street which has many different types, many different buildings. It has the Philip Johnson building, the Goodwin Stone, the Caesar Pelli, and the Curatorial Tower, which stands there with the same width as one brownstone, actually. And then it evolves, going up and becomes larger and turns onto the next side. And what seems to be a very expressive architecture is in fact a very minimal approach, which deals exactly with the issues of zoning, of the distance we have between this tower, this Pelli Tower, and our tower, and other air right conditions on this spot. It also is interesting, I think, as a type of building which has different scales in it, a kind of sky lobbies. This is a curatorial tower, as I said, and these lobbies would have allowed for the different departments to have like a common place where the different levels are coming together and create like a house or a vitrine or a big window to different sides of the city. Next one. The scheme is very simple. The 53rd Street, 54th Street, 5th Avenue, and 6th Avenue. This is the old MoMA, the existing tower, the garden wing, and the garden. And most of the existing buildings have gone and will go. And what we did is we arranged the galleries around the garden on 2 floors only, so that you can come in and around the lobby, which is double height as now, where you have art in, you can walk around the garden and you have art on the 1st floor, and you go upstairs, very, very simple, and you have the galleries right on top, on 2 floors, and all around the garden. And all of which is curatorial would be in this building, which overlooks the whole area and which is connected with the galleries through 2 courtyards, which sit on top of the galleries. Next one. As I said, I don't want to explain everything, but this shows you just briefly the Goodwin Stone building, which is the actual entrance, where we also provided the entrance, and also an entrance from 53rd Street, so you can walk through the whole complex. Philip Johnson's building would be turned into a virtual museum. We have those round forms which are indicating the spaces, the stair and the big eye, as we called it, where you can look down into the basement, where we have 3 cinemas. 1 is existing and 2 new spaces. So when you come in, you have at the same time, you have the garden in front of you, which is upgraded because it has art around it, and everything is sort of embracing the garden. You have the proximity to the galleries, to the cinemas, to the restaurant, and to the shop, as well as to a contemporary gallery which starts on the lowest floor. Next one. That's the lobby, which has changed and which we wanted to turn into art space in a way that the sculptures in the garden would historically be expanded. I mean, the sculpture exhibition would be expanded historically into the lobby, so that the sculptures which are now stopping with 1950s sculpture or even earlier would come into the lobby up to very recent sculpture, Jenny Halter and other sculptures. So the whole garden would sort of expand onto the street. Next one. The upper floors, third floor, and the narrative, and etc., etc. Next one. And the section which we worked on in a way that you can have within this very urban type of museum spaces which are almost loft factory sizes, which would cut through from 53rd to 54th Street with a height of almost 10 meters, that you could create spaces like in Marfa, like Judd has done in Marfa, in such a museum. That was a proposal for an exhibition for American sculpture in the 20th century. That's why we took the Jonathan Borowski, just to show the scale of the whole thing. Next one. Another cross-section, and the way how the tower evolves over the different floors and has different floor heights and these sky lobbies I was talking about. Next one. 53rd Street, the existing entrance, the new entrance, where because it's higher, you would get the feeling of the garden from the street, the through space I was talking about, and the curatorial tower. Next one. Let's show a few images of this curatorial tower, because it's an important aspect, I think, which we work on in other projects, in other new projects, which shift from rectangular forms into other forms, let's say. In this case, all these lines could be defined through, as I said, air rights and zoning and so on, but at the end, of course, we were interested into creating this specific form. Next one. From 53rd Street and 5th Avenue. Next one. And we walk around the tower, and to understand that it's difficult to understand the shape, and that we in fact did everything to cut the shape, to cut the image, the clear image you could have from the shape. Next one.
What would be the material?
Glass. It would be glass and printed glass also. It would not be transparent everywhere, because it also has storage and offices. It's a mixture of different uses. Next one. That's from 6th Avenue and 53rd Street. Next one. Next one. And again from 53rd Street, where you can see where it starts on a very narrow spot. Next one. We think it has to do, it could be related to the signal box, which is not a tower, but it is a tower-like piece, where also we did everything to sort of hide, or not hide, but maybe blur the clear edges of the building with the way we treat the facade. Next one. As you may know, it is a signal box, which is like a big computer. It has stores, different stores, different floors in the building, but it has very few people, and that's why it doesn't need to have windows like in a normal building. It has a few windows where people, 3 or 4 people who work there temporarily, they can have a view outside, and some daylight can come in. That's where the bands, the copper bands, are twisted, opened. Next one. And you can see here that the way the bands are twisted give an effect almost of a big brush, which sort of is being brushed through or over the volume. Next one. Unlike in earlier signal boxes, people don't look from inside out onto the world. The world is not the, might almost say, analogical world, but it's a digital perception of the world, which happens on the monitor, which is inside. And that also we wanted to express. Next one. You can see in which way it is. It's not quite a rectangular piece, but the way we arranged the copper bands, and we also wrapped it around some mechanical spaces, it loses the only, I mean this only rectangular shape it could have. Next one. When the night falls, the light from inside gets stronger, and it reveals the fact that it has floors and it has some windows, and all of a sudden it's connected to normal buildings. Next one. And at night it's not connected with normal buildings anymore, of course. It's then really a totally independent piece in the midst of these railway fields. It sits very close to the engine depot, which I showed in the model, which in its character, it's very different. It's more industrial, it's more down to earth, kind of a building type. Next one. This shows the early facade drawing, where we were not so clear about what we were going to do yet. So these bands were opening only where we had the windows behind. But we didn't like that, and it's clearly, next one, it's clear why, because we still showed the scale, we still indicated the floors, and the whole design was actually about not showing and not revealing that. Next one. And it's a very magic effect the building has at the end, but it's very simply done, and I like to show this image for that reason, that very many of our projects are very simple, and we try to find very simple and inexpensive solutions, especially for the railway company. They would not have allowed us to do that, especially when they heard we want to use copper. They didn't want to let us do that because they said it just comes after gold. But in fact, we could prove that copper was less expensive than aluminum over the years, of course. Next one. Another element which we like to use and we work on in different projects is the system of layers and the way the world behind and in front of the building, which is not just a line, but which is much more, which is certainly something very interesting in contemporary architecture and with contemporary materials. It can be exploited and explored further. Next one. For instance, in this building, which is also a very recent design we are working on in London for the Laban dance studio, dance school, which is a large school for dancers. And Laban was a Hungarian dancer who escaped from the Nazis and went to London during the war. And he founded a school which is now among the few really important schools in the world. And the Laban Center needed a new facility, which they will hopefully build in Deptford Creek, in the east part of London. There too, we are thinking of using a kind of a screen between the inside and the outside. And in this case, it would be large plastic tubes that size, but really strong colors, unlike on this model, to create strong colors effects. And these tubes can be changed mechanically once a year in order to adapt to the angle of the sun, how the sun comes into the building. Behind that, we have a glass screen, milky glass or plastic, like we used in the Bricola factory in Mulhouse, so that the shadows of the dancers are another important architectural element we would like to use and sort of use it as an architectural element. The movements of the people would be an important part and directly visible from the outside and the inside. So the studios would have two solid walls on the side and two translucent walls in the front towards the outside and towards the inside. Next one. The building is curved on two sides, which has to do with the site, with the place we put the building, which is a kind of nowhere's land at the moment. The whole building is more of a landscape, of a movement type of building than a clear shape. Next one. This is the building, and that's the new site, which we all do ourselves. So we invented the park, and the park is relating to the building and to the shape of the building. This round form has to do with the kind of park we do, which also has a slope, so that walking up the slope through the garden, you perceive those tubes which sit in two rows, and then you walk over and the whole building starts to move, has a certain movement in the building. So the garden and the building relate, and together, this embracing, gesture of embracing, has to do with the garden and also with how the building relates to the few elements it has in the neighborhood. It sits on the creek, it sort of touches the creek, and the way we arrange the trees also allows for a special perception of this little church, which is quite kind of an interesting piece in the neighborhood. Next one. So the facade, the curved facade and the building becomes part of the neighborhood through these three types of gesture we sort of invented for that part. Next one. The ground floor, it has two floors. The ground floor is a very open landscape type. In the middle, it has a theater, which is like a heart, red painted and fitted out dance theater where they will have public performances. It has a library, which is accessible through this ramp where you go up. This has changed now, the design. Now we have a ramp which goes up, and then it has the library which sits on top of other spaces here. It has two studios, large studios, which are cutting into the building, and it has an auditorium and administration, and it has three very large stairs, which are like huge screws, about 7 or 8 meters wide, which sort of cut through the building and connect the two levels. The top level is the studios, which are densely packed, like two different city types, a more modern Corbusian type and a more older type on top. Next one. Sorry. In the section, you can see the theater. You can see this ramp, where you go in, the library, the dance studios on top, and it has three big courtyards which are cutting into the building and which are curved courtyards, like the building outside, so that when you come in, you walk through the curved facade, but at the same time you also perceive the curved surface of the roof and of the courtyard, which sort of lands in front of the theater here. It's like a canopy for the theater or a big chandelier, because we will glaze this courtyard and we will have a dense green landscape type in the courtyard. Next one. We have three different types of courtyards. This one is the one which lands in front of the theater. Then we have one which we call the flower court, and another one which is the rainwater court. And these three courtyards cut into the building with different depth. The rainwater one cuts all the way through, and that's where the water from the roof falls down into the building. The top floor has these 3 wedges where these different stairs are landing or arriving. And as I said, those are more spaces or spiraling architectures than actually stairs. And these little streets which are linking these wedges. And those are the dance studios which are glazed here and here. Next one. That's a video image of this ramp which goes up, and the one of these courtyards which lands in front of the theater entrance. Next one. And one of the wedges, and the way you look through into the garden. Next one. And as I said, the screens or the inside-outside relationship is, in this case also, the connecting element between the different projects. And we try to do that in many different ways according to the places and the materials and whatever we can take to use it and to do architecture with that. And in this case, this is the winery, the Dominus winery we just finished in the Napa Valley, our first American project. We used stones, local stones that we put in gabions, which are steel mesh, steel cases that you may know from landscaping. In Switzerland, they use it to prevent against erosion. They use it in Asia and Africa, everywhere. And we found it a very interesting method to build walls. And only working on that, we found out that you can pack them very densely and create a very strong, solid wall almost, which deals very well with the tremendous heat it has in this valley. Next one. But you can also huge, very large stones, so that there is always gaps which remain between the stones, and all of the sunlight falls through, so that the areas where you would like to have more light, where you have offices or other spaces or mechanical areas, the light would go through and also reverse from the inside out, so that we found exactly what we want to do with this material, that the stone is at the same time a very archaic and very heavy matter, just what it is, a stone, without mortar, without anything. And at the same time, in a negative way, it's just the image of the gap. It's almost like a photographic image, like the opposite. It's only a light element. Next one. The stone as a heavy piece, or also as part of the landscape, works very well because it's a very, very large building. And again, according to the different light conditions and the different seasons, the building changes tremendously. And sometimes, even if it's so large, you can hardly see it with the background, in front of the background, with these mountains. And the landscape is just incredibly beautiful. Next one. The building sits here, we put it here, we inserted it in the vines, in the vineyard, which is a very interesting piece, actually, element in the landscape. It's almost like a text. That's why we chose this very simple form, which sort of continues this reading. We will, in a second phase, rearrange that, build a bridge, and sort of enhance this central axis, which runs through everything, which is very practical way to deal with the grapes. And in fact, it's like a farm building. Next one. It's a farm building which has tank room where the grapes come in. It has barrel cellars. It has offices. It has cellar masters' rooms. It has tasting rooms, and it has storage room. And as I said, the landscape is so beautiful, and we took quite a while to understand what we could do there. And first we were shocked by the beauty of the landscape, but also by the quality of the wine. Next one. The wine is so fantastic, and it's done by French winemaker Christian Moueix, who does a famous French wine that has done this American wine for 10 years before deciding to build the winery. This is the plan, the ground floor with this main arch, and in the center it has the tank room where the grapes go first, here in section. Then they go in barrel cellar, first year, then second year. These are smaller spaces for cellars. This is a tasting room, and that's the storage, the wine library on top, the tank room again, and the offices, which are fully glazed. Next one. The building is about 120 meters long and about almost 10 meters high. This is the main arch, one of the entrances in the upper floor. The linking corridors between tank room and offices. Next one. The barrel cellar, first year. Next one. And it always has these wonderful views into the landscape, which we try to understand which areas on which floor we would like to sort of screen almost. Next one. I think this image shows best what we wanted to do, and that we have this tremendous solidity and those almost archaic architecture, which is almost like an African architecture where the steel is working like ropes, and at the same time when you walk through the building and the same thing becomes so light and is nothing. And these two sides, or these different sides of something that we perceive or believe something is like this forever, we try to question. And truly, I think in this way you walk through the building, you literally can understand that. Next one. Unfortunately, we had to put these thin mesh here. It was not something we especially liked, this almost plinth we created there, but this was to keep the snakes away from the walls. Next one. In fact, this has rattlesnakes, and that can be quite a problem. That's how the walls are being built, hold back to steel or sometimes concrete walls, according to where you are in the building. Next one. And the snakes can jump up to a certain height, and we wanted to, as I said, keep the snakes out. And the Mexicans who work there, they kill the snakes and eat them for lunch sometimes. But we still had to, that was a serious issue, and we, next one. And we had to go through tests and tested what we could do, because we wanted to do this wall and to keep the snakes away. And so we bought a snake and put it in a cage in a steel mesh, and on the other side we had a rat, which we also bought. And we tested the quality of the mesh and in which way the snake could be kept away from the rat. And when we came back in the next day, the snake had gone, but the rat was still there. And in fact, the rat has eaten the snake because the snake could not go through, but it could bite into the tongue the rat could bite in the tongue of the snake and literally suck the snake through the gabions. So we, next one. But finally we found a mesh. We bought another snake, and the second test was successful. I say this because, of course, it's funny, but it's really also serious that we do many. In most of our projects, we use systems or techniques that haven't been used. And if we don't really test them, and if you don't really go for the safe side, we could not do that, because first of all, the client wouldn't let us do it, and especially in America, I think that if something happens, we would be sued. You know, I mean, it would be. Next one. The ceilings are also a thin metal mesh, so that somehow this material runs through the whole building in different variations or different qualities. Next one. It has a kind of a dining room on the top floor as well as in the lower floor. Next one. And as I said, in the evening, the light shining through the stones is very interesting aspect of the building, that it works in both ways. Next one. And clearly, when you see it from far away, this effect is a bit comparable maybe to the signal box, and that's another sort of connection between the projects. This is the last image. Thank you for your attention.
Please, is there a question for Jacques?
Also critical ones. I'm very open.
I can understand it's quite difficult after such a dense lecture, you know, in which you presented your work. It takes a while to frame questions, but I would like to ask you probably one thing which is maybe the most the question which many people will have on their minds when they see the work. You know, your work is I would say incredible. Let me phrase the question in a different way. The skin of your work, the skin of your buildings, is something we are confronted with when the photographs you're talking about. You're talking about the skin, which in fact is changing over time, changing by the light, it's changing by, for example, in the studio, by the sound, by the water. I would say, and maybe you could go on to answer the question in a way that I think it counts also for the interior. And that's where people are not, let's say, when critics are writing about the work, I'm not talking about it, right? I'm convinced that maybe you can say a few words about it.
Clearly, I'm very attracted by the exterior. But the lectures, it's very simple, or it's simpler, let's say, to talk about surfaces than spaces. Not only talk, but especially show photographs, because you cannot show pictures of interiors. It's always very difficult to represent or to present or to express a space, 3 dimensions. Very rarely this works, and we clearly work with space. It would be ridiculous if we didn't. And as soon as we work on more expressive space in terms of shape, you know, as soon as you go for more expressive shapes, outside as well as inside, you attract the view more easily and more clearly, and you can then also say, well, this is the space I wanted to do, because you can, you know, it's distinguishing from a normal space, let's say, more radically and more strongly. But in most of the cases, especially in early work, when we could do a storage building or a factory, you know, the space is not so attractive because the client wanted us to just do a box. But as soon as we work on space, like for the Tate or for the Laban or for other bigger also the winery, the spaces are very important and are very interesting part of what we want to do. Also urban space, you know, the way we deal with space with denser and wider, and we like to squeeze and change and to explore all things, space or surface or whatever.
Talking about interior, obviously there is a kind of concern for the civic or social aspect of the work, and I mean how people enter, what happens with them, and how then you kind of distribute them in Tate or in MoMA as well. People really talk about skin and the material and the manipulation with the light. Could you say a bit more about this concern for the civic aspect of your work?
In terms of the MoMA, it would have been very interesting for us to use the works of art like an architectural layer that you walk through, and to have the garden. As I said about the urban study as well as for the Tate, we try to take what is there and then we make a selection, like the brick, the chimney, or the river, or remember the Ricola building with the limestone quarry, the quarry wall, the cliff, you know. We take some elements and then we enhance that, you know, and try to bring it out, like we expose it. And that has to do with, we have often talked with Remy about, you know, the whole lecture could have been dealing with issues of exposing. If exposing yourself, when you talk, the gesture, you always expose the way you put a glass somewhere, and we try to expose. I don't want to be so, it's not a lack of modesty when I say to expose the world. Wherever we are, we try to expose the world in the way we see the world, you know. When you think of the winery, the screens, you know, or the stone, we take something and give it back in some way. Every architect does that. But we enhance this aspect rather than, let's say, shape it in a very personal style. That's why I always say we are not so interested in styles or individual styles. Very often they bore me for that reason. I mean, I exaggerate because whatever you do, you bring in your own personality and your individual whatever, but you do that more or less. Yes?
I'd like to ask you the question. If I understood your work, I saw the whole time you are working more or less with the archetypes, kind of simple boxes, and try to observe them as objects, and good skin and the quality of material, give them another quality. Just to break the flow and minimal art. And now I see the last project, the desktop and I see an additional expression which is not monolithically based.
But this is...
Is it by intention or it's kind of just a small exercise which is the size and back to the track?
Small exercise. The very early work we did was very expressive. I don't know whether you know that. The photo studio, the swimming pool was very expressive. Frank Gehry-like, even if we didn't know him at that time. But we are, as I said, you know, it's the image of a Swiss architect, and people, and many Swiss architects have this kind of minimal issue or minimal approach. And I don't think we have that. But there are many projects where we deal with very simple or basic forms. This is true. And it's also true that this will go as well as other things. We don't care. We try to do things which are beyond this shape or this material, that material. We're interested in everything, you know. It would be, again, I mean, I don't know whether we can deal with everything. That's a different issue. But I'm very interested in to understand what we do by doing the projects. If I knew what I'm doing, you know, I probably wouldn't do it anymore. I would not be interested to get up in the morning, I know exactly that's how architecture would work. That's sometimes difficult, but it's the only way to do it, you know. It would be boring if you knew exactly, this is my way, you know.
Jacques, I think the question about shape obviously is one. The other is a question about color. You are talking about the Berlage school in London that you are using color. Could you, because it's not something you're using that often in your work, but you're using color now maybe for the first time to really in a spatial way, I would say, to use it. Could you say something about
It's very difficult. Color is very difficult because I know very few architectures which are successfully dealing with color. And but it's obvious that all people like colors. You know, everything is colored. But we try, and we think for the dance school we have a good opportunity and the chance to work with it. And but I don't know yet based on which conceptual background we would like. We don't want just to do it in a very impressionist way, where we say, well, it would be nice to have some lila or some red or whatever. It would be ridiculous. And to find this approach or this, we don't know exactly. Maybe we need an artist again. You know, I mean, when we work with artists, very often this is very selfish, you know, because we like to work with them and they bring in something that we couldn't do, and they are interesting people, and for them also it's interesting because they can work on another scale and do things they couldn't do in their own four walls. So colors are certainly something we want to deal with in the future, much more than we've done so far.
Is there maybe another question?
What is your attitude with use of materials which become fashionable? Become fashion.
What's the question?
The use of materials which become fashionable.
Like what?
Yes, when you use material, and you can see it's all around, often used by other people, by other architects. What's your attitude really?
That's why we always do something new.
Is it allowed?
Oh yeah, I think architecture has a lot to do with copying, and this is quite normal. I think everybody copies and looks and sees, and as I said, when we work on something, it's because we like to do that, and we try to find out something. And if we take something which exists, which can happen, and we find a new approach or a new way to deal with that's it, you know. But I have no problem with that.
During the lecture, I noticed a certain tension in your buildings between them being an architectural object or a landscape object. Can you say something more? Is it the detail that prevents the architectural object from vanishing completely into the landscape? Like, for example, in the winery project where you had the snake detail, is it exactly that detail that you, in fact, didn't wish there to be that prevents the building from completely vanishing into the landscape and therefore into a landscape object more than an architectural object?
Now, when you stand in front of the building, you don't think it vanishes at all, because it's big, but it has both sides. From some angles and from some views, it's almost invisible. I mean, I exaggerate, you know, but from other aspects, it's almost too visible, you know, and it has this big arch, you know, and big scale, and so sometimes using these materials help to sort of, you know, make it less bulky, you know. And
do the rocks come from there? Are they local rocks, or did you say it, but I missed it?
You mean the people? The rocks. We brought them from Switzerland.
Imported.
No. The stone are fantastic, but this is also such a story. You know, everybody believes that stone is forever, and this is a wonderful thing. And when we selected the stones, we had to make sure that the stones will stay longer than the gabions, you know, because everybody talks about the mesh. But in fact, very close to the site, they have done a kind of no, it was not a tunnel. They just cut into the landscape, you know, to do a new highway, new street, and they cut into the landscape and they revealed a fantastic stone cliff, very strong stone on two sides, you know, and this fantastic material which they kept, they left, you know, and had the asphalt band which ran through. This wall was weathering down so dramatically fast that the whole stone was turning into sand within 3 or 4 years. So the stone sometimes is not so eternal as one believes, but that would have been a reason to import the stone from somewhere else.
But you didn't.
No, we didn't. No, we found it. We found it in a local. It's a volcanic area, and it has wonderful stones, basalt. It's a black basalt from the area. But the gabions, the steel, we imported that from Switzerland because they didn't have that type, that quality.
Is it the idea of the owner to promote wine through your architecture?
I think the wine, to be very clear about that, the wine is so good, and if the building can cope with that, I'm very glad.
From my experience, making no style or making you visible more difficult than making you visible. You need excess effort to make no style. In such a way that excess, and you took it effort, and you say it's a rhetoric. And it's something to do with you mentioned about the small country you mentioned in the beginning.
No, I don't think so. I think that has nothing to do with that. It's more a way, a strategy.
For instance, in tape galleries, your schemes create more difference to the other entries. You know, other entries try to do something big and also impressive, while your scheme is almost nothing, which you create some sort of absence of nothingness, a presence of nothing, which works very well in the rhetorical context.
It's difficult for me to answer that question. I don't know whether this has to do with... I think it's a strategy rather than another. And I must be very clear also about the urban scheme I showed. This is just one strategy. There are others, and sometimes they are as good as or as important. But I think it's just important to be able to work with different issues in a more or less straightforward way, and to be able to upgrade them with what you do, instead of, you know, fuzz around. That's basically what I want to express. I think there are architects who work with totally different strategies in a very successful way also. And yeah.
How are defined the roles between you and the partner?
Ideally, we work together on every project. I mean, we too work on all projects together, but not the same amount of time always. The winery, for instance, was a good example where we worked together because we decided to do the long trips to California together, and in the plane for 12 hours we found a lot of time to work interestingly. That was a good experience. And but normally we work in groups, like in a school, you know, like. And sometimes independently, and of course Pierre is doing different things than I'm doing. We have very different characters, but it's not so that I'm the designer, star designer, and he's sort of the officer, you know, in the background. But the best designs are designs where we both can bring in as much as possible.
final question?
There is a?
There is a seduction in your work, probably because of the tension. There is the latent tension. And this was wondering, or maybe waiting, that you are, as Milan said, you are spinning out of the control. Now I'm asking you, it could be that that was happened in the Tate Gallery, or I don't know. I'm just wondering about this.
Maybe you should ask Rem what he wanted to say. No, I think I understand what you want to say. I think it's a very precise description that we hold back, sometimes, and to also to create some more tension. But I can't answer this question. We will see in the future what happens. One never knows.
Herzog.